I used to sit and stare when I was just a little boy for hours and hours into the eyes of the devil. Strange, milky white, paler than white eyes they were, almost like the halo around the moon in a humid summer city sky. Blue but not, white but not, just milk, or like the color of milk but skim, not whole. Skinny, veiny, blue-white eyes, deep in hollows that were the color of centuries-old rust. Hollows in a face as red as ember, redder than red. A face that almost burned just to look upon its color, that glowed like lava around the icy, glassy sheen of those whispering, suggestive, ancient blue eyes that would stare back into the new blue of my own, looking for the opening, the offer, the cheat, the door ajar that would let him in so he could pilfer, plunder, or bargain for the soul I was just getting used to the fit of, that I had worked so many lifetimes to inhabit. We would sit in silence for hours. Sometimes he'd snack on cheddar cheese or saltines or whatever happened to be in the kitchen. If anybody came in, my mom or my baby brother or Lori, the girl a year older than me who lived next door, he was always very cordial with them. He would stand when my mom came in and take her hand as if he couldn't decide whether he wanted to kiss it or shake it, just gentle and gentlemanly. Always attentive, asking when my dad was coming home on leave from the Navy, how her parents were, and so on. Mom always seemed a little skittish when he would talk to her, like she was meeting a celebrity or something. And sometimes she would blush, which I thought was silly and a little embarrassing. Although in hindsight, I'm sure that it had something to do with the fact that, besides being bipedal on two cloven hoofs, he never wore any clothes, and contrary to the popular depictions of him we see in cartoons and elsewhere nowadays, there was no question that he was a he, if you know what I mean. When he stood, he was probably just over 6 feet tall. His voice, the meter, the timbre, the range of it, reminded me for all the world of the old radio tapes my granny used to play for me of Orson Welles. The disingenuous charm was there too, you know, the way Welles always referred to himself as the audience's humble servant. He would lay it on so thick, especially for my mom, talking about how delicious her cooking was, how lovely she looked in this or that dress, had she done something new with her hair. It all would have been a little smarmy if he weren't so sincere. It seemed to me, in all of my 5-year-old wisdom, that he was genuinely grateful for the time he got to spend among us. The little pleasantries he would exchange with the people who would come through, how kind and attentive everyone was. In a way, it was very touching. How he would marvel at my baby brother and how quickly he was growing up and how quickly the seasons seemed to come and go. I guess when you're the devil, time does go by very fast. Anyway, he'd made clear from the start that he wanted my soul. I had made it just as clear that I was not in the business of giving up my soul, especially not to someone like him, considering what I'd heard the Catholic members of my family say he did with people's souls once they were in his possession. We would bicker back and forth endlessly. It really annoyed him when I started asking simple logic questions like, what makes you so sure I have a soul? And did God create man, or did man create God? I think he thought I was being impertinent, and I guess I was, a little, for someone my age, but come on. Wouldn't you be a little bitchy too if someone waltzed into your yard, your house, your life, completely naked, with little flames coming off of them and saying, I want your soul, I will have it, what are your terms? And then kept coming back over and over again, trying to wait you out? Pretty presumptuous, if you ask me. So this went on for long enough that we just stopped arguing after a while and stare at each other. He waiting for me to budge even a little, me knowing that I wouldn't, and doing that thing that all children are secretly masters of, sitting, staring, waiting. I wasn't trying to be mean or rude. I actually grew fond of the guy after a while, and we had some pretty nifty conversations, but I was 5 years old. I had been raised by parents who were agnostic at best, so I wasn't even sure if I believed in him. And how misguided would it have been for me to offer my soul to someone and then discover that they weren't even real? His visits became less and less frequent, and by the time I was ready to start kindergarten, he'd stopped coming entirely. He wasn't mean about it. He'd write me apologetic letters about how unbelievably busy he was, asking how the family was doing and what I'd been up to lately. Sometimes he would call, and we would laugh and laugh, mulling over the conversations we'd had and talking about what was going on in the world. We still email each other, even now, once every few months. I told him when my son was born I was surprised that he hadn't showed up to start haranguing him about his soul. He told me that he knew about my son and that he didn't even want to think about locking horns with him. I think he maintained a close relationship with my mother, too. I would hear her on the phone sometimes in hushed conversations that seemed to last for hours, and she would giggle the way that she had when he would take her hand. Invariably, when I would ask her later who she'd been talking to, she would simply reply, "Oh, just an old friend." The last time he came to see me, we had a particularly lively debate about whether nuns had become an obsolete facet of the Catholic Church before the discussion of my soul as always became topic number one. We reached our usual impasse, and the waiting game began. After what seemed like an eternity, he leaned forward over the coffee table that separated the space between us and said, "This matter is not negotiable." I stayed very still for a moment, then leaned right into his face and in an even tone replied, "You are absolutely right." Another moment as he took in what I'd said, and then he burst into gales of boisterous laughter. I sat back and grinned. Then I noticed that tears were coming down his cheeks as he laughed, which I thought was strange. We talked for a little while longer, and then he said it was time for him to go. I got up and walked him to the door and told him to have a good evening and that I'd see him again soon. And that was the last time I saw him. It's nice that he stays in touch, but, I do miss him coming around.